In the book of Genesis, there's a lot of repetitive names of people and how long they lived and their children and all these types of things. But you also have weaved into that is a story. And the writer of Genesis is either sloppy and just random and just documenting, or they're trying to create an enticing story for the reader. Something that's relatable or something that's true even. That's true and enticing. In Genesis, I think the writer purposefully wrote the book with a lot of foreshadowing and a lot of twists. And what makes the story so supernatural almost is the truth found in it, and the truth that's still seen today. You can match up these characters. It's like a script. That's why it's called a scripture. It's a script of reality, and you see the repeating patterns in real life. I mean, the whole book of Genesis seems to be twisted, and there's just a lot of additions that aren't actually found in the book, and a lot of subtractions or misrepresentations that are inconvenient. So in the very beginning, God makes the world and he speaks it into existence. He says, "Let there be light." And he makes Adam in his own image. So if he's the creator, Adam is an image of the creator, a reflection, an echo, something similar, but isn't exactly the same. It's a copy. So then when God makes Adam, he makes animals for Adam, and he brings the animals to Adam in order to name the animals. It's really important that Adam names the animals because that's part of the creation. That's the servitude. That's what they were made to serve God. In what way? In this way, in the naming of things, as a filter between the earth and God and creation. And so Adam, he names things, and then God makes Eve, and he brings Eve to Adam, and Adam says, and this is important.
And Adam said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man."
He speaks it into existence with his words, and that's important to the story. So God tells Adam, when he makes him and when he puts him in the Garden of Eden, he tells him that he could eat from all the trees.
But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die.
And then the next chapter, we're introduced to a new character, and it's the serpent. And the serpent is introduced as a prudent, specifically intelligent character made by God that way. And the serpent goes to Eve, and it specifically says he goes to Eve to speak to Eve. And it's almost suggested that Adam's not involved. And the serpent inquires, "Did God ever tell you not to eat from any of these trees?" Just wondering. And Eve says, "No, we can eat from all the trees except for the one tree in the midst of the garden. We can't even touch it lest we die." And the serpent informs Eve, you won't surely die in the day that you eat from that tree. In fact, you'll become like God's, knowing good and evil. And God knows this. And so trusting in the serpent over God, because if she trusted what God said, if she trusted that she would surely die, she wouldn't have eaten from the fruit. So she trusted the serpent over God and what the serpent had to say, and she saw that the fruit was good and desirable, and so she ate it, and she gave it to Adam, and he ate it. So at this point, it's kind of almost as if Adam's innocent. It's like he didn't really know, he just took it from his wife. And then God comes and he's looking for them, and he's like, "Where are you?" And Adam said, "I'm hiding because we're naked." And God said, "Who told you you were naked? Did you eat from the tree that I told you not to eat from?" And Adam said, "The woman that you gave to me, she gave me the fruit and I ate it." So it seems as though Adam didn't really hear what the serpent said. I mean, he just got the fruit from Eve, and God gave him Eve. So then God looks at Eve, and he's like, what have you done? And the woman says, the serpent beguiled me. And God looks at the serpent, and he curses the serpent. And he curses Eve. And then he curses Adam. And in the curse to Adam, he says what actually happened. It wasn't just that the woman that God gave him the fruit and he did eat. But God says exactly what happened. He says,
because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it.
Because you hearkened unto the voice of your wife.
Cursed is the ground for thy sake.
Pointing to the fact that the voice, the words, the belief, the hearkening of words is very important. And this comes up consistently in the Bible when it comes to prophets, when it comes to the Tower of Babel. Words and speech are very important, and they're part of the servitude that man was made for to God. God, when he curses a serpent, he says there's something very interesting, which is almost presented like a riddle. Doesn't really make a lot of sense. He says,
because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all cattle, and above every beast of the field. Upon thy belly shalt thou go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel.
I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. And hers will bruise your seed's head, and yours will bruise her seed's heel. So it's strange, because it's like the seeds. So what do you mean the seeds? Like her seed and your seed? And I think at this point in time, they didn't really understand how babies work, and they'd see them just like they'd see other plants. You plant a seed inside something, and it grows under the ground before it pops up. And that's kind of what they're seeing. So the seeds are the babies when they're planted inside the stomach. That's the seeds. But why would there be enmity between two seeds? Doesn't really make sense. Well, fast forward. We have Rebecca and Isaac. Isaac he's actually the second son of Abraham, the first being Ishmael, whom Abraham had with a maidservant. So he has his first son, Ishmael. He gets rid of him, just sends him off into the wilderness with a thing of water to die, basically. Him and his mom, because his wife told him to. And then Isaac gets older, and Isaac marries Rebecca. And Rebecca is barren, and he didn't follow in the footsteps of Abraham by having a child with his maidservant. He prayed and he waited, and just as Abraham and Sarah had Isaac later on in life, so did Rebecca and Isaac have their children later on in life. So Isaac, Abraham's son, is now going to be a father. His wife is pregnant, but they don't have ultrasounds. They don't know what's going on in a pregnancy. They're not expecting to have more than one child in the pregnancy until Rebecca, she goes to God and she inquires, what's come of me? Because she's having all this pain in the pregnancy, severe pain, because it turns out that what God tells her, in thy womb are two nations, two manners of people, and the one is stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. Another riddle. It doesn't really make sense at this point. And the seeds inside of her, there's two of them, and they're two different nations, and there's enmity between them, and they're wrestling in the womb because of this. Two seeds wrestling in the womb, two nations, two manners of people.
And I will put enmity between
okay, so that sounds familiar.
And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed, between thy seed and her seed, between thy seed.
The birth of the two babies, lo and behold, she does have two babies in her. She gives birth to the first, and he comes out ruddy and hairy, and they call him Esau. And as he's coming out, the second is grabbing onto his heel, latched onto his heel, and that's how he's born. Rewind back to the curse to the serpent. I will put enmity between the two seeds, and the serpent's seed will bruise the heel of the woman's seed. Enmity between the two seeds, the two nations, the two manners of people. The enmity, the wrestling, and then the birth. One is grasping onto the heel of the first. But the first, the older, shall serve the younger. Okay? So, fast forward again. Jacob and Esau are older, and Isaac, the father, he loves Esau, the oldest. And Rebekah, she loves Jacob. And mind you, Jacob is the one that becomes Israel. The one that gets the blessing, right? And so Isaac, he loves Esau because Esau's a hunter and he hunts for the family and he takes a lot of the burden off Isaac. And Rebekah, she loves Jacob because she thinks that he's going to get double portion of the inheritance. And so she is all about Jacob. And Jacob's a homebody. He doesn't really do much compared to Esau, who is a hunter, a man of the fields. And so one day Esau had been hunting for a long period of time, and he's famished. He feels like he's going to faint. And he manages to get to the tent where he sees Jacob had cooked a soup. And he says, the soup is desirable, and he feels that he needs it or he's going to die. He feels like he's going to die, and he needs the soup. And so Jacob, he uses the soup and says, okay, I'll give you some of the soup if you sell me your birthright for it. And Esau says, what good is my birthright if I'm dead? And so he sells his birthright for food. It's reminiscent of the Garden of Eden and the food, the fruit that the serpent uses to beguile Eve into losing for her and Adam what their birthright was. Their birthright was paradise, and they lost it all for the desire of this food that they were beguiled into eating. It's not that Jacob lied to Esau. He didn't lie. He just used something that he knew could be desirable to Esau in order to strip Esau of his own birthright. So it ties right back into the Garden of Eden. It's the character that was presented in the very beginning, the curse, the enmity between the two. It's the serpent's seed and the woman's seed. This is clearly, Jacob clearly is portraying the serpent's seed. And so, if that's not proof enough that Jacob's grabbing onto Esau's heel, the serpent will bruise the heel of the woman's seed, the enmity, the food, using the food to trick or take or steal or rob or strip people of what is theirs or what they were given or what they have a right to. You have now Isaac, the father. He's old and he's blind, and he tells his beloved son Esau, I want to give you this special blessing. Go out into the field and hunt us some venison and cook it for us, and then come back and bring it, and we'll sit down, and I'm going to give you this blessing. And Rebekah overhears it. And so when Esau goes to hunt, she goes and runs and gets Jacob and says, Jacob, go get a lamb, and I'm going to cook it, and you're going to take it to your father, and you're going to steal the blessing that your father means to give to your brother. And Jacob's weary. He says, well, if my father finds out that I'm tricking him, he might curse me first instead of bless me. And here's another moment where the words are important. if the man curses Jacob, then he's cursed. But if he blesses him, even if the blessing is stolen, then he's blessed. And so Rebekah has to disguise Jacob. Even though Isaac is blind, he may feel Jacob's body and feel that he has no hair. See, when you go back to the Garden of Eden, and after they ate from the fruit and after they were cursed, God made animal skins to put on the people to cover up their nudity. Well, Rebekah goes and gets animal skin to put it on top of Jacob on his arms to make Isaac believe that he is Esau. So imagine the serpent seed. The serpent seed is now going to dress up like the woman's seed, the one with the animal skin on them, to pretend to be the woman's seed, to take what is rightfully Esau's from him. And so he goes in and he says, "Hey, Father, it's me, your son Esau. I'm here to get this special blessing." And Isaac is weary. He's like, "You sound like Jacob." And Jacob's wearing Esau's clothes, and he comes with the food and he sets it down in front of Isaac. And Isaac says, "How in the world did you get this and cook this and hunt this so quickly?" And Jacob says, "It's the Lord thy God. He gave it to me," which is clearly a lie. And Isaac is drinking wine and eating, and he's weary still, but he feels Jacob, and he feels like Esau with the hair, and he smells Jacob, and Jacob's wearing Esau's clothes, so he can smell Esau, and he says, "Oh, that's my son, the smell of my son, the smell of the field." And so he blesses Jacob.
God give thee of the dew of heaven, and the fatness of the earth, and plenty of corn and wine. Let people serve thee, and nations bow down to thee. Be Lord over thy brethren, and let thy mother's sons bow down to thee. Cursed be every one that curseth thee, and blessed be he that blesseth thee.
So then directly after this, Jacob leaves, and here comes Esau with the food, and he sets it down in front of Isaac, and Isaac says, "Who are you?" And he says, "It's me, Esau." And Isaac is like, "Who just left here?" And he just starts trembling and shaking, and he's upset, and he says, "Your brother beguiled me, and I've given the blessing to him." So they used food once again and tricked now the father, into doing something that he wouldn't have normally done had he been able to see clearly.
Of the tree, and I did eat.
And so now Esau wants to kill Jacob, but he's not going to do it until Isaac has passed away, because he doesn't want to hurt his father. And Rebekah, she knows this, so she goes to Isaac, and she doesn't just say, "I want to send Jacob away because Esau might end up killing him." She just lies to Isaac and says, "What would we do? I don't know what I would do if Jacob marries a Hittite like Esau." And so Isaac, he agrees to give his blessing to send Jacob away to her brother Laban. And so Jacob goes and meets his cousin Rachel, whom he falls for immediately, and he agrees with Laban to work for him for 7 years in order to take Rachel as his wife. And so he does this, and then after 7 years, it's like the wedding, and he expects to see Rachel, and instead he's given Leah, the older sister, whom he didn't even want. And then Laban's like, "Oh, well, that's our tradition. You didn't know? The older has to marry first. The younger can't marry until the older." So then Jacob ends up working another 7 years for Rachel. Now there's enmity between Rachel and Leah. And especially because now God can see that Leah is not wanted. And so he is blessing Leah with all the babies. And Leah's consistently having pregnancies and having children, whereas Rachel's unable to have children, seemingly. And at one point, Rachel finally does what Abraham and Sarah did, and she gives her maidservant to her husband Jacob to have a baby with her in place of Rachel. So her maidservant gets pregnant and has a baby. This is Dan. And Rachel says, "With much wrestling have I wrestled with my sister, and I have prevailed, and God has given me this child. Therefore I name him Dan." And this is interesting because we know as the reader, it wasn't wrestling that she had been wrestling with her sister. She was wrestling with God here. It was God who was not allowing her to have a baby, not her sister. Her sister was having the baby because she was unwanted, and God could see that, and so he blessed her with children, whereas Rachel was wanted. And so there was no wrestling between the sisters. It was Rachel wrestling with God. And Rachel's being wanted, she wasn't going to be given everything, all the babies and all the love from her husband and everything. So God was, as a fair, equal, just God, he wanted to make sure both were blessed in some way. And so that's interesting, and it's kind of foreshadowing a later story. So then Jacob now has his 2 wives, and they're having kids, and he wants to leave Laban's place and make his own life for himself. But he's worked so long here, he wants to take some of Laban's property with him because he feels that he deserves it because he's worked. And since he worked for him, he should be able to get a lot of what he worked for. Just kind of like, I mean, I don't know if that's reasonable. It depends on your political stance, I guess, because it's like me saying, oh, I worked for McDonald's for this many years, so I should be able to take half of the company. So it's like, is that really, is that reasonable? So anyways, he wants to take part of Laban's flock, and so then he makes an agreement with Laban again that he would work 7 more years for Laban, and after those 7 years he would only take the speckled or spotted livestock, and the rest would be Laban's, so as to make it fair. But then he uses some kind of magic trickery to turn the livestock that are speckled to be more fruitful and to be stronger, and also turn the livestock that are not speckled to be weak and less fruitful. And he purposely does this. And so in the end, basically, he can see that the father, Laban, and his sons, they're talking, and they're like, Jacob has been nothing but horrible for us. Look at what he's done. He's going to take everything from us. And we don't understand why this is happening. Why did we ever let this guy in our home? And Jacob can feel the pressure. He's like, kind of like when he left his hometown in the first place to save his own life. He could feel that his life was nearly in danger because of how people feel towards him and what he's left them with. And so in the night, he leaves with his 2 wives, with their children, with all their livestock, and with some of Laban's servants and his things. And Rachel herself steals a bunch of Laban's idols and hides them, not telling anybody, but she takes them. And they leave in the night. And Laban comes after him, and the whole time they're basically running away from Laban and his sons. And so Jacob's having to look over his shoulder again, just like he did when he left his hometown with Esau. He's looking over his shoulder, terrified, running with his tail between his legs and his bags packed full of other people's things. And so Laban, he finally catches up to them, and he's angry that they stole all his stuff, took his daughters, took his grandchildren, took all his flock, took everything from him. And he even searches for the idols that were stolen and curses whoever stole them. And Rachel, she sits on top of them so as to that he couldn't find them. And so they make an agreement that they are going to part ways and not kill Jacob. And Jacob is told by God to go back to his hometown, but Jacob's terrified because Esau's there and he thinks Esau's going to kill him. And so he listens to God and he heads towards his hometown, but on the way he periodically sends servants with gifts of livestock, with gifts of animals, in order to try to appease Esau, and so that Esau wouldn't kill him. And in this he says something very, very confusing. He says to the servant, before he goes, he says, "Tell my lord Esau, your servant Jacob is coming to see you." It's like, wait, your lord Esau and you're his servant? That doesn't seem right. Okay, so the servants are going periodically, trying to bring the animals to Esau. And a servant comes back and he says, "I found your lord Esau and I gave him your gift. And by the way, he's on his way with 400 of his men to meet with you on your way there. He's going to meet up with you." And so Jacob is scrambling. He's terrified, and he splits up his entire family in case one of them are ambushed by Esau. The rest could escape and get away. And so here's where we're at, where they're split up and it's nighttime, and Jacob's walking towards his hometown, terrified, and we know Esau's on his way, and he's in the dark. He's in the middle of in the dark of night. Esau's on his way, and then suddenly a man appears and begins to wrestle with Jacob. So a man comes running up and in the dark, so no one knows who he is, and he begins wrestling with Jacob. And they wrestle until daybreak, and the sun's coming up and it's about to become light out. And the man then starts to try to get away. He doesn't want to be seen in the light. And Jacob grabs onto him. He won't let him leave. And the man bruises his inner thigh near the head of his snake. And Jacob says, "Bless me and I'll let you go." And the man says, "What's your name?" Now rewind back to when Jacob stole Esau's blessing. And Esau came in and Isaac was sitting there. "Who are you?" And he says, "It's Esau." And he said, "Your brother beguiled me and stole your blessing." At that point Esau said,
Is not he rightly named Jacob? For he hath supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and behold, now he hath taken away my blessing. And he said, Hast thou not reserved a blessing for me?
His name is rightfully named Jacob, because the name Jacob that was given to the second son, Jacob, who became Israel, it was a pejorative. It was not a nice thing to be named. It was a heel grabber, someone who tries to pull people back to take their role. That's who Jacob was. That's who he was named. That's the name, the word that was given for him. And the word creates, right? And so he was given that name, Jacob, the heel grabber, the heel bruiser, the serpent seed. And that's who he was. That's who he is. And so now back to where we were. They're fighting, they're wrestling. He asks for a blessing. "Give me a blessing." And the man that he's wrestling with, he says, "What is your name?" And he says, "Jacob." And he says, "Your name is no longer Jacob. Your name is Israel, because you have wrestled with man and with God and have prevailed." And then the man's gone, and Jacob says, "I'm going to name this place Peniel, because this is where I had seen the face of God." So now it's daytime and the man's gone, and here comes Esau, and Esau's charging towards Jacob, and as he's coming, Jacob is bowing down, laying down in the dust.
Upon thy belly shalt thou go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life.
He gets to Jacob and he embraces him and he hugs him and he's crying and he missed him and he loves him and he's obviously forgave him. He didn't even bring up anything about the past. And in this, he says, why did you give me all these animal sacrifices? I don't need your animal sacrifices to forgive you. Now, Jacob looks at Esau, whom he hasn't seen in over 20 years at this point. He looks at Esau and he says something interesting. And now bear in mind that just a few hours ago, Jacob had seen for the first time, the face of God. Okay? Now he's face to face with his brother. And what he says is, he says, looking at you is like looking upon the face of God. Almost as if to say, you wouldn't believe it, I saw God earlier. And you happen to look a lot like God. Now, let's think about the dynamics of what happened when he was wrestling with the man. It's only Jacob who said that he wrestled with God. But it was the narrator who said that it was clearly a man. And if the narrator had thought it was anything else other than a man, or meant to describe it as anything else other than a man, he would have. Because earlier in that same chapter, he described where Jacob passed a place where there were two angels, and he's clearly said angels. He didn't describe them as men when they were really angels. The narrator says that they were angels. And we know we can't really trust what Jacob says, because Jacob also said that God gave him that food to give to Isaac. Remember, he said, the Lord your God, he gave me this food. But he didn't. And earlier, we didn't touch on this, but earlier when Jacob was traveling with Rachel and Leah, he told them that it was God who told him how to change the coloring of the sheep, and as to take the best sheep and make up all the sheep that Laban would keep to be weak and fragile. He told them that God was the one who showed him how to do that, but we never read about that in the book. It never said that. It said Jacob himself did it. It was Jacob's doing, not God's. But Jacob, he's not honest about God. We know that he's willing to lie about what God says and what God does and what hand God has in things. He's willing to lie about that, and we know this. Or he's willing to twist things into seemingly something that they're not, kind of like the serpent saying, well, God knows in the day that you eat from this tree, you won't surely die. I mean, the serpent wasn't lying. He really wasn't, but he still beguiled them into losing everything. And so that's the same dynamic that's happening over and over. And so he says, looking at your face is like looking upon the face of God. He's saying, oh, that was you. And it's here that we realize it's really interesting, because in tradition they say that Jacob got a blessing and Jacob was blessed and Jacob got this blessing from God. And if you question what is the blessing, that he would be fruitful, that he would be blessed, that he would be given plenty of food and corn and wine, or the land of milk and honey. Abraham was promised land, and that his seed would be like the sand of the sea, that he would be the father of powerful nations. Well, when we see what the blessing actually brings, it doesn't really seem to be a blessing, and it never really comes to fruition. It's just a constant striving. It's like you get a little bit of honey, but mostly you just get sour milk. It's interesting, in the land of milk and honey doesn't go bad. Honey lasts forever, and it can be eaten forever. It doesn't mold. And that's what's really interesting about it, because milk, it goes bad really, really quickly, especially in this time period when they didn't have a refrigerator. Could you imagine how quickly milk sours? And they're given the land of milk and honey, of both the good and bad. And when we see the blessing that Jacob got, Jacob's living his entire life looking behind his back, running away from things, stealing from people, tricking people. He has a bunch of kids, and the kids are not all that great. And we don't really get to follow the life of Esau, but what we know about Esau is that he has 400 men backing him. He's forgiving and loving and caring. He's powerful. His children are all dukes. And God, even later on in the Bible, is protecting his land that was given to Esau. There was land given to Esau and his descendants that they had already had. They didn't have to strive anything for. They were already given it, and they were protected. Whereas Jacob was sold into slavery. And then when Moses came and took them out of slavery, they were in the desert, and God gave them the dew from heaven and the fatness of the earth, and that was the manna. But Jesus himself said, your fathers did eat manna in the desert and are dead. Jesus said, I am the true bread from heaven. I am the living manna. As if to say, his dwelling is the dew from heaven and the fatness of the earth. Not just that he would be given those things, but he was those things. Now go back to when Jacob stole Esau's blessing. Esau was crying to Isaac, begging Isaac, is there not one blessing left for me?
And Esau said unto his father, Hast thou but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, O my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. And Isaac his father answered and said unto him, Behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth, and of the dew of heaven from above. And by thy sword shalt thou live, and shalt serve thy brother. And it shall come to pass that when thou shalt have the dominion, that thou shalt break his yoke from off thy neck.
And what's interesting about this blessing is in different Bibles, in different versions of the Bible, it's presented as literally two opposing things. In the King James Version, in the most literal versions, this is what it says. It says, your dwelling shall be the dew from heaven and the fatness of the earth. Whereas in some newer versions, they changed it. They added to it. They added, your dwelling shall be away from the dew from heaven and the fatness of the earth. In order to rectify a misunderstanding. They couldn't understand how, or I thought that Jacob got the blessing. There's no way that he could have actually blessed Esau with anything productive. He must have said, your dwelling shall be away from the fatness of the earth and the dew from heaven, not your dwelling shall be the dew from heaven and the fatness of the earth. So they added the word away, but that's not what it said. Literally, when you read the actual text, it said, your dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth and of the dew from heaven from above. Because the people who were interpreting the Bible, the newer people, because they didn't understand, they didn't have eyes to see or ears to hear. And so in the blessing to Jacob that Jacob stole from Esau but was given to Jacob, it was, may God give you the dew from heaven and the fatness of the earth and plenty of corn and wine. Whereas for Esau, the blessing was, your dwelling shall be the dew from heaven and the fatness of the earth. And by thy sword shalt thou live. And this saying, by the sword shalt thou live, is never repeated in the Bible. Never said again in the Old Testament. This isn't a common saying because it makes absolutely no sense. Because when you say fall by the sword in the Bible, in this time, the saying fall by the sword, it means to be murdered. And so when you say, and by the sword shalt thou live, it's saying, and by murder you shall live. You shall be murdered and live. And so it doesn't really make sense either. And then you shall serve thy brother, but when you should have the dominion, you shall break his yoke from off thy neck. And so out of context, if you don't know the New Testament, this wouldn't make any sense until Jesus comes. And in the Quran, which is also a book that's based off of the Old Testament. It's using the Old Testament, it's a Judeo type book. It comes from the Judeo religion. It's following that. It's a New Testament on its own. It describes Jesus as a prophet, and in that book his name is Esau. And Jesus, he told his disciples, let him that is to be served be a servant. Jesus said, I am a servant. Jesus said, my yoke is easy and my burden's light. You shall break his yoke from off thy neck. He said, I am the dew from heaven. I am the fatness of the earth. Your fathers did eat manna in the wilderness and are dead. God did that, the manna. But to Esau, he said, your dwelling shall be the dew from heaven. And Jesus said, your fathers did eat manna in the wilderness and are dead. And I am the true bread from heaven. My dwelling is the bread from heaven. I am the dew from heaven. And those that eat me shall never die. And this is where the saying, and by the sword shalt thou live, makes sense. And by the sword, by murder, you shall live. Jesus said that he who was rejected shall become the first cornerstone. The rejected one, the one who was hated without cause, shall become the first cornerstone. Jesus said, I'm hated without cause. He's killed by the sword, and he lives. He's murdered, yet lives. He said, you don't have to give me animal sacrifices for me to forgive you. I forgive you. And so, in the book, Jacob wrestled with Esau. And Jacob said it was God. Jacob says Esau's God. Because if Jacob believes that he wrestled with God, then he wrestled with Esau, and that's what the book says. Then is it the truth? Well, everybody says that he wrestled with God. But words are important. Titles and names for things are important. So did Jacob wrestle with Esau or God? Or is Esau God? Or is Esau Jesus? Well, we know that Jesus is Esau. And we know that it's said that Jacob wrestled with God. Well, when the Jews and the Christians, when they say that Jacob wrestled with God, they aren't lying. When Jacob said, tell my Lord Esau, he wasn't lying. Because they're all in agreement that Jesus, who is Esau, is God, is the Son of God come in the flesh. Jacob and Esau, they wrestled in the darkness like they did in the womb. And they came out into the light, and Jacob was given a new name, just like you are given a name when you're born. They're born again. Jacob is born again, given a new name. Jesus said, you have to be born again. You have to be born again to enter into the kingdom of heaven. Esau came there in the dark to wrestle with Jacob just like they did in the womb, so that Jacob could be born again and given a new name, a new title, and become someone new. And he said, come with me to my kingdom. I'll walk with you. I'll send my men to go with you. And Jacob said, no, I'll meet you there. But Jacob never went.
Save me, O God, for the waters are come in unto my soul. I sink in deep mire, where there is no standing. I am come into deep waters, where the floods overflow me. I'm weary of my crying. My throat is dried. Mine eyes fail, while I wait for my God.
Save me, oh God. I'm drowning in my soul. I'm in deep water. The flood has overflown. I'm weary. Can you hear my cries? My voice is broke. My throat is dry.
foolishness and my sins are not hid from thee.
You know my foolishness, my sins are not.
Let not them that wait on thee, O Lord God of hosts, be ashamed for my sake.
Don't let my faithlessness bring me shame.
Because for thy sake I have borne reproach. Shame hath covered my face. I am become a stranger unto my brethren, and an alien unto my mother's children. For the zeal of thine house hath eaten me up, and the reproaches of them that reproached thee are fallen upon me. When I wept and chastened my soul with fasting, that was to my reproach. I made sackcloth also my garment, and I became a proverb to them. They that sit in the gates speak against me, and I was the song of the drunkards. But as for me, my prayer is unto thee, O Lord, in an acceptable time. O God, in the multitude of thy mercy, hear me in the truth of thy salvation. Deliver me out of the mire, let me not sink. Let me be delivered from them that hate me, and out of the deep waters.
Save me, oh God. I'm so weak, I'm so
Let not the water flood overflow me, neither let the deep swallow me up, and let not the pit shut her mouth upon me. Hear me, O Lord, for thy loving kindness is good. Turn unto me according to the multitude of thy tender mercies, and hide not thy face from thy servant. For I am in trouble. Hear me speedily. Draw nigh unto my soul, and redeem it. Deliver me because of mine enemies. Thou hast known my reproach, and my shame, and my dishonor. Mine adversaries are all before thee. Reproach hath broken my heart, and I am full of heaviness. And I looked for some to take pity, but there was none, and for comforters, but I found none. They gave me also gall for my meat, and in my thirst they gave me vinegar to drink. I will praise the name of God with a song, and will magnify him with thanksgiving. This also shall please the Lord better than an ox or bullock that hath horns and hoofs. The humble shall see this and be glad, and your heart shall live that seek God.